So we had numerous successes. We, of course, had failures in various other cases. Formed a wonderful relationship. And again, as others have said, I learned a lot from Maggie. One last story. The legacy goes on in lots of different ways, as we've said. I got a call from a legal services lawyer in Eugene, Oregon, who said, I figured out I got this process by which I can get doctors to accept Medicare assignments. He was a Gray Panther and he was a legal aid lawyer in Eugene. And he called and said, can we work on this together? Can you get me some national publicity? Little did I know then that this person wanted national publicity and would use it. I'll tell you his name in a minute. Because I figured out how to do this and I want to exchange information and become an advocate with the Gray Panthers and with your organization. And so we worked on that together, and he's now a U.S. Senator from Oregon, Ron White. So, anyway, another former Gray Panther.
We're doing tag team here to try to bring out a few things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the intergenerational aspect of Gray Panthers, which I think was really core to Maggie's philosophy, but was largely misunderstood by many people, the media in particular. The media, if you haven't noticed, is sort of able to focus on one thing and not like multiple complexity. And so they loved the idea of a wrinkled radical and a cute little older person raising hell, right? But they couldn't comprehend at the same time that it truly was young and old working together. Now, most of you know the name Gray Panthers, but how many of you know the original name of the organization that Maggie, when they started, and after, a little bit of the history for some of you who don't know, Maggie worked for many years, most of her life, for the Presbyterian Church, for the Office of Church and Society, which was sort of their activist arm, if you will. And when she turned age 65 in 1971, she was forced to retire because of her age. And she was outraged by that, gathered together a few other people in similar circumstances, got together with some younger people, and formed what is now known as the Gray Panthers. But their original name, which if they had stuck with it, I think we would not have ever heard of these folks, was the Consortium of Younger and Older Adults Working for Social Change. So there's a lot in the name. And what's interesting about the name is that it was actually the media, to Paul's point, the use of the media. At some point, a year or two into their organization, because the Black Panthers at that time were still very prominent, reporters said, "You're not the Consortium of Younger and Older, you're the Gray Panthers." And they went back and they had a board meeting about it and they discussed, is that something we should stick with? And fortunately, I suspect Maggie understood it immediately that this was going to be helpful to achieving their mission. But the concept, so Gray Panthers doesn't in itself capture intergenerational, whereas their original name does, it just doesn't work, right? And so there was always a struggle, but I think one of the quotes from Maggie that I want to read, I think it captures a lot of her philosophy and relates to this issue. Our competitive, profit-centered society has segregated people by social class, race, and age. Separation of old from the young violates the essential wholeness and continuity of life and sets the stage for intergenerational conflict. The self-imposed segregation of old people in retirement homes deprives young people of mentors and our society of historical perspective. So she really got that issue about the importance of generations working together. She referred to retirement communities as playpens for old people. She just railed against them. And in fairness, people ought to have choices, right? But she just felt that the choice of self-imposed segregation of separated generations. Another key thing is, remember that era. I mean, we were right post-Vietnam War, and young people had been in the streets opposing the war. And think about the role of younger people now in revolutions around the world. Maggie got that point. She realized that to bring about serious change, she needed to connect with people who weren't locked into the status quo. all three of us have become so.
I'll take my tie off.
I wore a tie just in honor of Maggie, but I know that she would not have thought it was important. But anyway, so that's what's happening when we get older. And I think it's interesting, and we all are self-conscious about this, that this is not an intergenerational panel. So we're going to bring Brooke up here to do the Gray Panther growl at some point. Make sure that we are represented intergenerationally here. But I think that the role of younger and older people working together is fundamental to the philosophy and was really key to taking a radical approach and being willing to challenge institutions of society. It also led, as we'll talk about some of the strengths and lesser strengths. It led to an organizational structure that was challenging, but was key to the philosophy. Another thing that Maggie talked about, and I think in jest to some extent, but was serious about it, is that she never married, and she attributed her success, to the extent that she was willing to acknowledge her own success, in part to the fact that she hadn't married. So think about the generation that Maggie was from. The men available to her, for the most part, wanted to put her in a traditional role. And she had serious relationships in her life that almost led to marriage. Didn't, but in part because she was pretty radical, and she didn't want to fit into what then were the traditional roles for women. And so that that part of her life, I think, was important. And so what about family? Again, intergenerational. Maggie always lived with younger people. She roomed with Paul. She never really roomed with me. We went up to her hotel room after that first time I met her at that conference, and we like to laugh about the fact that we gave birth to the Gray Panthers in Los Angeles at that meeting, but that's as close as it got. Though I have to say, she did like young men, and there were a few occasions.
There are these rumors.
There are rumors, and Paul and I are vying for being the source of that rumor. I don't think it was, but there were some situations I won't talk about that were pretty interesting. But Maggie, one of Maggie's philosophies in a program of the Gray Panthers was intergenerational shared housing, and the concept of people aging in their homes where they've raised their children and their children have moved on and they have a big house, to bring other people in, share that housing. And Maggie added the intergenerational component to that. So she lived in a big brownstone in Germantown, outside of Philadelphia, and for most of her life there had young people living with her in a kind of shared housing arrangement. So again, the philosophy of intergenerational, the importance of that to her work, and really very much a part of her personal life.